It was an usual 911 call. The operator calmly asked for the location of an emergency, but the voice on the line was anything but calm. A man, trembling and hesitant, spoke of a gift and asked, almost to himself, whether she was still breathing. Her name was Alexandra, or Alex in short, a compassionate soul with dreams of becoming a nurse. Her last text came at 6 p.m. to that man that evening, sounding hopeful and happy. Hours later, she was lifeless in her apartment, with a gunshot wound to the head. Matthew Ecker, the man who made the call, was also a nurse practitioner, a trusted professional who had come to Alex's aid after she called him in distress. He claimed she was in danger, and he had come to help. What kind of danger can a nurse be in? What exactly happened to Alex, who was all happy and positive, and suddenly everything simply ended for her? December 16th, 2022, just a week before Christmas. St. Paul police received a call around 2:50 a.m. Officers Ching Vang and Justina Haser, along with some backup, were sent out to check on a shooting report. When they arrived, the caller, Matthew Ecker, was still there when they arrived and took them to a second-floor apartment. Officer Vang was the first inside, and immediately upon entering, they saw the bathroom to the right. In the first bedroom, 32-year-old Alex Pennig was lying on her back with a single gunshot wound to her left temple. There was blood around her head, and there was a handgun resting on her left shoulder, and her hand covered over it. Though it sounded like quite a clear crime scene, there's something that didn't make sense. The officers searched the apartment upstairs, speaking to all the people who lived in the building, and nobody reported hearing anything exceptional, like shooting sounds. They found Matthew sitting on the floor, completely devastated. After some minutes, Matthew stabilized and eventually shared to them what happened. Matthew said he lived about 3 hours away, but had rushed over to Alex's apartment after getting a panic call from her. She said she had fought with her boyfriend, Shane Anderson, and was afraid he might come to her apartment. So, Matthew brought his gun, just in case. When Matthew arrived at Alex's apartment at about 2 p.m., Shane was not there. But Matthew and Alex went to some local bars where they, at Camp Bar, encountered Shane. A row started between Shane and Alex, and Matthew tried to intervene to mitigate the situation. However, Shane punched him and he was thrown out of the bar. Matthew and Alex stayed there a bit longer and chatted with some people before heading back to her apartment. Back at the apartment, Matthew couldn't shake out of his head the strange turn of events that had just taken place. Out of nowhere, with no warning or reason, Alex supposedly drew a gun, went into the bathroom, and locked the door behind herself. A moment later, a gunshot echoed through the apartment. Matthew said he forced open the door and found Alex lying on the floor with a gunshot wound. He used his nursing skills to try and stop the bleeding, but couldn't save Alex. Later, he washed off his hands and called the cops. Alex's parents were also left completely stunned by the news. They could hardly believe it. They said the whole thing didn't make any sense, especially since Alex had always hated guns and had never shown any kind of interest in one. Mary Jo, who had texted Alex earlier that day, noticed nothing unusual. She said Alex seemed fine, not depressed or anything. Detectives Abby DeSanto and Jennifer O'Donnell were assigned to the case. When they checked out Alex's apartment, they found alcohol and prescription meds, including antidepressants and amphetamines. This suggested she might have been struggling with depression, but there were some suspicions in Matthew's story that didn't make sense. For one, the way Alex's body was positioned didn't match what Matthew had said happened. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and on either side of the open door, Alex's legs were visible. If Matthew really had kicked the door down as he described, her legs probably would have been behind it. Matthew had claimed that washing his hands right after trying to help, but by the time police arrived at the scene, the sink was bone dry. So it didn't add up. He hadn't washed her hands right before calling 911 like he said. Plus, Matthew had told them that his primary objective that day was to take care of Alex because he claimed Shane Anderson was violent. To support that, Matthew pointed out some punch-like holes in a closet door near the bathroom, stating that Shane did it during a fight. This raised some doubts, so the detectives decided to listen to Shane's side of the story as well. Not long after Alex's death, the detectives showed up at Shane's place. When they told him Alex was gone, Shane was visibly shaken. He even blacked out when he heard the news. Even though he was clearly upset, Shane agreed to go to the station to talk. Shane said that he had been dating Alex for about 4 months and described his relationship as really happy. He talked about how sweet and fun Alex is, how she was everything he'd ever wanted in a partner. Shane also informed that they spent almost every day together bonding over her 2 cats. He said that he was not really an admirer of cats before he met Alex, but learned to love them due to her. Turns out, this was a very far cry from what Matthew had described Shane to be. Shane even told the detectives that the previous day he and Alex had been talking about how he would break his lease and move in with her. They both wanted to raise families one day. As Shane was questioned by the detectives regarding the supposed fight with Alex early that morning of the incident, he seemed very clear that it never really became physical. Now, in an earlier fight with Alex, he'd gone to town on the closet door, punching holes into it when he was drunk, but made sure they knew their arguments were never violent. But Matthew's story was different. He told the detectives that Shane had actually gotten physical with him that night at Camp Bar, even hitting him during their confrontation. Shane didn't deny the altercation, but had a different take on it. He said he punched him, but it was the moment when Alex got up from the couch and walked to his room with some guy. To gain a clearer perspective on what actually happened, the detectives would go and check the security footage from Camp Bar. They hoped it would give them the missing parts of what happened before the fight started and clear up the contradictions in the stories Matthew and Shane gave. They could see from the footage that Alex and Matthew walked into the bar with Shane already seated in it. Alex stood up and sat across the room, and Shane stood to go talk to her. After some brief conversation, Matthew got up to go over to them. It seemed that he made the introduction himself to Shane. You could sense that there was tension between the two, but it heated up fast when Shane threw a punch. It was that fight that got him ejected from the bar. After he left, Alex and Matthew stayed for some other hour, drinking and chatting exactly as Matthew described. But none of this clarified why Alex would later decide to take her own life. The medical examiner declared her death as undetermined, so detectives went into deeper research into her history, searching for any possible clue to explain the tragic ending. The thing with Alex is she's one of those people who was constantly reinventing herself. For example, one week she's brunette, the next week blonde, then black, and sometimes red. Each color was like an attempt for her to try and break free or become something entirely different. Growing up, people who knew her back then would always remember her as a super energetic, fun-loving person who'd always seemed to be up to something. As investigators began to dive deeper into Alex's life, they realized things were not as simple as they seemed. Her parents, Mary Jo and Jim, suddenly opened up about how their daughter had at one time during college battled depression. For her, everything started going wrong when she got caught up in addiction to prescription pills. It got so bad that she attempted to end it in 2016 by overdosing. The craziest part? After popping a bunch of pills, she went downstairs to her mom and confessed what she had done and then ended up throwing up all the pills. It was more of an SOS call, and her parents responded promptly by getting her treated. During the recovery period, something clicked in her head. She began to realize how much of a difference those nurses who helped her made, and inspired to be a nurse. By 2019, Alex had obtained her licensed practical nurse degree, and at graduation, she was selected to speak. In her speech, she talked about her past experiences which left scars, but she also spoke on how appreciative she was for the second chance she had been given. As far as anyone else knew, Alex had really gotten back on track. So when her life took such a tragic turn, it was such a cruel twist of fate for someone who had been working so hard to rebuild. Investigations revealed that Alex and Matthew had been in a covert relationship since 2020, as Alex began to work at a walk-in clinic. At first, Alex's parents thought that Matthew was only a colleague, but his parents, Blaine and Terry Randall, revealed that it was an affair. At least that's what they knew. The thing was, Matthew had 4 kids and was married. And though Alex was aware of his family life, she continued the relationship. The two had broken up physically by summer 2022, but remained friends. Matthew remained with Alex, supporting her while she was going through a bout of alcoholism that lost her jobs and sent her to miss work. He helped her financially too, covering rent and giving her cash whenever she needed it. 3 days before Alex died, She texted Matthew saying that she was totally shut off from the world and needed a break for her mental well-being. She said she didn't have any hope left. But when detectives dug into her death, they started to wonder if she really took her own life. They found a gun pressed against her chest, but what's weird is that Alex was right-handed. But the gun was on her left side, with her left hand on it. That did not seem right to them, so they decided to watch the security tape from her apartment building. The footage showed Alex and Matthew arriving around 2 a.m. They stepped out of view as they went up to her apartment, but returned down to the lobby moments later. According to Matthew, they had stepped out to get his headphones from the car, but Alex stayed in the lobby while he did so. She looked impatient with arms crossed and fidgeting with her phone. When Matthew returned, Alex did not even hold the door open for him, and he just shrugged before following her back inside. The whole thing was weird. Detectives started wondering if they had been arguing, because Alex's behavior seemed totally out of character. Detective Abby DeSanto couldn't help but notice that the footage she was viewing was the last time anyone saw Alex alive. It was close to 2:50 a.m. when Matthew made a 911 call. But the thing is, the lobby footage had no sound, so there was no way to tell if Alex and Matthew had been arguing before that. The detective spoke with Matthew, who insisted that there was no argument, this being their joke all the way home, and that everything was fine between them. However, their family was not so convinced. They thought Alex might have been upset because of a fight with Shane, possibly over something that happened earlier at a bar. They also noticed that Alex had been on her phone in the footage, which made them think she could have been talking to Shane. Matthew's family thought that any text messages exchanged between Alex and Shane could be important to knowing what Alex was experiencing, and if those texts could be found, they could potentially offer some insight into the frame of mind she was in at the time of her death. But the detective could not open Alex's phone because no one knew the passcode, and Shane claimed to have lost his phone the previous night. This line was also dead-end because although there were some intuitions that something had happened between them, the details were fuzzy. During their interview with Matthew, the detectives again concentrated on what happened in the apartment. Matthew described in detail that Alex was holding the gun while backing into the bathroom. At first, the gun was pointing downwards, but then she cocked it using her left hand and then probed her left temple. Detectives began to suspect that maybe Matthew had lied about helping Alex, but then again, maybe he had lied to them about calling 911 immediately. So, later, Matthew eventually confessed to the detectives that he had moved the gun initially and put it in his suitcase, but then placed it back in Alex's hand. He said he was afraid and just wanted to go see if she was all right. But at this point, the detectives were scratching their heads. If he is really innocent, why does he have to act that way? He kept saying the gun was accidental and he did not shoot Alex or kill her. Still, detectives weren't convinced. Then Detective O'Donnell found something huge. As forensic technicians were moving Alex's body, they noticed a small metal object under her head. It was part of the bathroom door lock. The way it was placed, it seemed as if it had dropped there while Alex was still alive, and that the bathroom door had been forced open before she was shot. The detectives thought that perhaps Alex and Matthew had just gotten into an argument, and she had run inside the bathroom to get away from him. When he smashed down the door, the lock piece would likely have fallen to the floor, and Matthew had then shot her right after forcing his way in. So they charged him with second-degree murder. Of course, Matthew's family was utterly in shock. They could not believe it because this was a person they knew, whom they said was just not the kind of guy who would do such a thing. However, his defense attorney, Bruce Rivers, argued that there existed reasonable doubt. He said that the metal might have gotten under Alex's head when Matthew tried to help her by lifting her head. But it wasn't clear to the detectives yet. They mentioned that the positioning of Alex's body was not according to that story. Her legs were straddling the door, and if Matthew had broken it open after shooting her, then her legs should have been pushed aside. That wasn't like what Rivers' idea had proposed, that the swinging door could be between her legs if Alex had shot herself. The whole thing just did not add up. People started questioning whether he had anything to do with it because there wasn't any blood on his clothes. Some thought maybe Ecker fired the shot while standing behind a door or something, which could have shielded him from getting splattered with blood. But the forensics didn't quite line up with that theory. Then Rivers stepped in and suggested that Alex might have taken her own life. She pointed out gunshot residue on Alex's left hand and her DNA on the gun. which seemed to back that up. On the other hand, no DNA or residue from Ecker was found on the weapon. Some even thought he wiped it clean. Ecker, though, said it wasn't weird that his DNA wasn't there, trying to brush it off. Now, when they dig into Alex's health around the time of her death, they found her blood alcohol level was almost 3 times the legal limit, and she also had a cocktail of prescription meds, including Prozac and Valium, in her system. These didn't kill her directly, but they did indicate she was buckling under the weight of depression, money problems, and work stress. And sure enough, there were texts from Alex to Ecker talking about how rough things were for her. But it also came out that Ecker, who was a licensed nurse practitioner, had been giving Alex prescriptions, even though she wasn't his patient. It wasn't exactly legal, but not really a crime either. Ecker argued that he acted out of compassion. But detectives brought a new angle here. They said maybe Ecker had a motive to kill Alex because they used to be romantically involved, and if Alex was going to spill the beans to his wife, that could have been messy. River didn't buy into that, though, pointing out that there wasn't really any evidence of a falling out between Ecker and Alex. River argued Alex's death had been the effect of her own battles, basically whether or not the jury believed it was suicide or homicide. The medical examiner couldn't figure out what happened for sure, and another examiner agreed with that conclusion. River pointed out that if they couldn't prove it was murder, then the defense couldn't be held responsible either. The deliberations became tense. And after 9 hours of back-and-forth deliberations, the jury finally announced Matthew Ecker guilty of second-degree murder. Surely, the trial verdict was a shock for Matthew's family. His sister claimed it was a knife in the heart to see him like that. It was already a shady crime now, with a shady judgment. But in the end, the judge sentenced Matthew Ecker to 30 years in prison. He was sent off to the Department of Corrections to serve his time. Matthew Ecker's family still believe he's innocent and are determined to fight for his exoneration. They won't give up on him. But since the case, Matthew's wife divorced him with full custody of their 4 kids. Alex is buried in a cemetery not far from her parents' house, and they visit her often to keep her memories alive. But amidst all these, what's your take on this? Do you think there's some more in the case and Matthew Ecker may not be the killer? What's your theory? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. And if you want to see how an abusive childhood can reshape someone's mind and how it can lead to darker things like murder, just click on this video to watch. We will be back soon with a new true crime story soon. Subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon to get the notification. And stay safe.